there are no pieces left of the building. There's nothing but steel. Individual
and the steel
pieces.
is all broken, as opposed to, like in David Ray Griffin's book, he makes a point of saying those core columns, those 47 core columns in the center, not the side columns that go up the building, but the center core columns were massive, and they should have been sticking up still.
Right, they're not only massive, but every floor is a mesh of steel. So you've got steel running up and down, and then you got a mesh of steel on every single floor. And so how does the building? It's a three-dimensional mesh. If you took away all the windows and all the carpeting and even all the concrete, you got a three-dimensional mesh of steel. And how does that just all of a sudden crumble into little pieces? And the firemen, when they went through looking for people, were making remarks like, I didn't find a computer. I didn't see a telephone. Everything was shredded. Everything was pulverized. They're making remarks. I never saw anything like this. And how does that happen? There weren't even any pieces of flooring material. Now, if a building floor were to fall down like that, you'd expect pieces, and it might be twisted, it might be bent, but you'd find pieces of stairways, pieces of elevator, you'd find crushed computers,
right.
You'd find maybe a crushed body and pieces. They didn't find anything except little bits.
Well, some of the most damning evidence that the story we've been told is false is they try to say the pancake theory is what happened. Could you describe that?
The official story is that when the planes hit, it broke some of the columns in the building. And so their theory is now the fires are burning there, and that caused the roof, the ceiling above it to crumble and to hit the floor below it. And then that cracked that floor, and then all those pieces went down and hit the floor below that, and that broke that floor. So that's the official theory, that it just went bang, 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 like a ball rolling down the stairs. Now that sounds sensible until you start asking yourself, well, wait a minute, if it takes 1 second to go bang to that floor and then 1 second here, or even a half a second, let's take a half a second. There's 110 floors.
Well, it would certainly take longer than a half a second, but let's go with half a second.
Let's say a half a second. That's 55 seconds. But you watch the video, you look at the seismic data, it was less than 10.
Less than 10
seconds. That's 10 floors. That's an average of 10 floors per second.
Now, this is an area that's so important for the viewers to get, because when I really digested that and understood that was such a powerful piece of evidence to show that something's wrong here, and that is that's free fall speed.
This is what most people don't understand. These towers are so big. If you were to go at the top of these buildings and then throw a rock over, just drop it, it would take about 8.4 seconds to hit down at the bottom. You look at the North Tower seismic data, the structure broke apart in about 8.4 seconds.
Yeah.
It was breaking at free fall speed.
That is the trademark of what happens in a controlled demolition. It comes down free fall speed, and we'll show video of this right now. When the building's coming down, you talk about this in your book and in your video, the powder, the dust coming out in horizontal, as we can see here. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, and on the free fall speed, that's the physics professor is now verifying this for us. That's another thing that people really need to understand. This physics professor in Brigham Young University and his class looked into this issue, and they said the same exact thing. They're verifying everything that we've been saying all this time, that you cannot have pieces of concrete crashing through steel and concrete floors as fast as they fall through the air. It's physically impossible. Right. And so he's verifying it. And then when you look at how the buildings came down, if you look at the photographs, a building is mostly empty air. So if the ceiling above us were to fall down, it would swirl the air around, it'd be blowing around, but most of it's just air. It just swirls around, and then most of that would swirl around the floor below it. But what we see when these buildings were falling, so-called falling, dust is just flying out the windows, horizontally hundreds of feet, and there's no corresponding swirling back. Mm-hmm. And so when a floor falls, it's true, it will push air outward, but at the same time, it's creating a vacuum above it. So there should be a swirl back up. There's no swirl. It's just outward, constantly outward.
You see the puffs of dust coming out each floor.
We made it at least 2 blocks, and we started running. Floor by floor, it started popping out.
It was like, if it had detonated.
Yeah, detonated.
If there were plans to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down. I was watching it and running.
And then you even see on the part of the south tower that tipped slightly, you even see, as you pointed out to me earlier, that it's coming, as it's falling, it's disintegrating.
Right, the entire top section of this south tower cracked, started to fall over, but as it's falling, you can see it turning into dust. Now, how does a piece of building, as it's falling down in the air, turn into dust?
Only if it's being demolished, and you can see, it appears in the video that it is coming up from the bottom, blowing,
right,
exploding. Also, you point out in your book that where is it? Where's that section? If it fell like that off the building, it should have crashed onto...
It was hitting this building, number 4. It broke this direction, and so it's this building, this part that broke off would be bigger than anything within Santa Barbara. It would be massive. If you were to take that part that fell off and lay it here in Santa Barbara, it would be towering above everything.
Right.
It's monstrous. And this thing started to fall. It broke, started to fall down, but as it goes down, it disappears. And then you look at building 4 underneath it, all you find is pieces of steel.
And building 4 and these other buildings, these small buildings down here, never fell. None of these buildings ever collapsed like that.
No. This building got crushed a little bit, but when you look at the rubble, that's the other thing that's mysterious about this. There's nothing but pieces of steel. It looks like it went through a shredding machine.
A shredding machine. There should have been much larger pieces, too, than what we find there. Am I correct on that?
Yeah.
It should have been. And I think our cameraman has a question.
Yeah. Did anybody, speaking of the rubble mentioned, did anybody check for anything besides what you would get, residue from the burning fuel, such as explosive?
Okay, he's asking, did anybody test for residue of fuel?
This is what Fire Engineering Magazine was complaining about. They said, you cannot touch that rubble. Stop selling it as scrap. As soon as these towers fell.
They were selling it as scrap.
That day, they were there pulling the rubble up on the grounds that they were trying to look for people. But they weren't just picking it up and moving it to the side as they were looking for people.
But you think they would save it and be able to take it to...
It was against the law to do anything else. You have to save it.
You would save it and take it to a place where it could be analyzed.
But that's right.
But that's not the case.
They didn't do it.
They sold it for scrap.
And not just for scrap, but to other countries like China and North Korea, where how are you going to look there? You see, this was what you call a violation of our own laws. They know it. The police know it. The FBI knows it. The government knows it. You had Fire Engineering Magazine complaining about it. They all know it was illegal.
However, if they were trying to cover up something, they would have to do that.
They would have to, because as soon as someone looked at that, they'd say, wait a minute, this building didn't just fall down. There's evidence everywhere of explosives.
And yet the few, I understand, engineers and scientists who they did allow were volunteer part-time people.
Well, that's the other thing that's mysterious. The government, as soon as this collapsed, said, oh, we'll look into it. Don't worry. But they didn't provide any money. They weren't helping. There were calls going out, please, if there's any engineers that can help us. And they're like doing this on their spare time, hardly any money. They spent more money investigating Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. And this is a major crime, and they don't care.
There was a great deal of resistance, not to get into theories of who exactly is behind this tonight. That's not our purpose, but I will say that there was a great deal of resistance by the Bush administration to any kind of investigation into this.
Yes.
So that was interesting. But again, I wanted to mention, like you said, if there should have been a much bigger pile of debris. That debris should have been preserved. The whole section that tilted, that we can see appears to be being demolished as it's coming down, it was non-existent on the scene. And also the wrong tower. I'm using some terminology again from David Ray Griffin's book. I know he won't mind. The wrong tower, he says, fell first. Could you go into that?
Well, the north tower, the one with the antenna, was hit first by the airplane. The airplane crashes into it. About 15 minutes later, the south tower is hit. And then about 56 minutes after the south tower gets hit, it just crumbles into dust.
And it wasn't even the first one that had the most damage.
No, it was the one the plane hit from the side. Most of the fuel burned out here on the side, making a